Hello everyone. Today we're gonna talk about two famous
Storytelling, yeah.
storytelling about two famous characters in history. First,
First, we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette. She is the last queen of France. And the second is Henry.
the the eight,
Henry VIII is the king of England.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so let me introduce myself first. My name is Leanna Putranoko and I'm from 11 Broadcasting and Television Program.
and I'm Matthew Fabian Sijabat from uh, 10 and broadcasting and apa? Television program. Uh,
So we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette first. Okay, she was born on November 2, 1755, in Vienna, at Vienna.
Austria, and then she died at October 1670 1903 in Paris, France.
She was the Austrian queen consort of King Louis XVI of France at 1774 to 1903. Her name is associated with the decline in the moral authority of the French monarchy in the closing years of the ancient regime. Though her courtly extravagance was but a minor because of the financial disorders of the French state in that period. Her rejection of reform provoked unrest, and her policy of court resistance to the progress of the French Revolution finally led to the overthrow on the monarchy in August 1792.
Early life and the role in the court of Louis XVI. In more than one sense, Marie Antoinette was a victim of circumstance. In her youth, she was a pawn on the diplomatic chessboard games that shaped the continent in the wake of 7 Years' War. This 11th daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Francis I and Maria Theresa, Marie Antoinette was just 14 years old when she was married to Dauphin Louis, grandson of French King Louis the 15th. On May 16, 1770, the stigma of being a representative of Austria when a connection with Vienna was unpopular in France remained with her throughout her life.
She was also unfortunate that the timed uninspiring Louis proved to be an inattentive husband. By the time he ascended the throne in May 1774, Marie Antoinette had withdrawn to seek companionship and distraction among a circle of favorites and politically vulnerable companions whom she might have avoided if her private life had been more satisfactory. Her most intimate friend from this time onward was the Princess de Lamballe. It was ultimately her husband's personal weakness and political nullity that forced Marie Antoinette to play such a prominent political role during the Revolution.
The role that she played in French internal and foreign policy between the accession of Louis XVI and the outbreak of the revolution has probably been much aggravated. Her efforts, for example, to secure the return to power of 18 Francois de in 1774 were unsuccessful. The fall of finance minister Minister and Robert Jacques target in Yeah.
The fall of Finance Minister Anne Robert Jacques Turgot in 1776 must be attributed to the hostility of chief royal advisor Jean-Frédéric Pellepic's Comte de Maurepas, and to the differences that arose between Turgot and Foreign Minister Carlos Gravier Comte de Vergennes over French participation in the American Revolution rather than to the direct intervention of the Queen. Marie Antoinette was not at that time interested in politics except as a way of securing favors for her friends, and her political influence never exceeded that formerly wielded by the royal mistress of Louis XV. In foreign policy, she encountered the opposition of both Louis XVI and Vergennes in her efforts to advance Austrian interests, and it is certain that her brother, Emperor Joseph II, was gravely disappointed at her lack of success. Even her indulgence of the persistent requests of her favorites, such as Yolande de Polastron, Comtesse de Polignac, did not entail a great drain on the treasury. Her other court expenditures contributed to a minor degree to the huge debt incurred by the French state in the 1770s and 80s.
Louis XVI inability to consummate their marriage and the Queen's resultant childlessness in the 1770s inspired rivals, including the King's own brothers, who stood to inherit the thrones if she did not produce a legitimate heir to circulate slanderous report of her age. Extreme marital affairs. This vilifications culminated in the affair of the diamond necklace in 1785, in which the Queen was unjustly accused of having formed an immoral relationship with a cardinal. The scandal discredited the monarchy and encouraged the nobles vigorously opposed in 1787 to 1880. All the financial reforms advocated by the King's ministers. This accident was all the more unfortunate for the Queen's reputation because since the birth of her daughter Mary Therese Charlotte in December 1778 and of the Dauphin Louis in October 1781, she led a quieter and more conventional life. Her second son, the future Louis the was born in March 1785.
The French Revolution. Though the Queen had supported Jacques Necker's return to power at the end of August 1788 and had approved of the concession of double representation to the Third Estate, her unpopularity was at its height when the Estates General convened at Versailles in May 1789. This was because she was regarded, though without justification, as an associate of the reactionary coterie of the King's brother, Charles Comte d'Artois, and because of the aspersions cast on her character by the King's cousin, Louis Philippe Joseph Duc d'Orléans. At the end of May, she seemed to have intervened a little in politics, as she was distracted by the illness of her elder son, who died early in June. During the crisis of 1789, as well as those to come, Marie Antoinette proved to be stronger and more decisive than her husband. After crowds stormed the Bastille on July 14, 1789, the Queen failed to convince Louis to take refuge with his army at Metz in August-September. However, she successfully prodded him to resist the attempts of the Revolutionary National Assembly to abolish feudalism and restrict the royal prerogative. As a result, she became the main target of the popular agitators, whose animosity contributed to the legend that, on being told that the people had no bread, she callously remarked,
"Let them eat cake."
Quilsman de la Brioche. In October 1789, popular pressure compelled the royal family to return from Versailles to Paris, where they became hostage of the revolutionary movement. During this time, the queen had been deprived of the company of many of her most intimate friends as they had emigrated after the fall of the Bastille, but she continued to display her great personal courage that sustains the loyal family both then and throughout its later disaster.
Because of Louis XVI, her son Marie Antoinette was to play an increasingly important part in the secret intrigues to liberate the royal family from its virtual captivity in Paris. In May 70 AD, the Queen reached out the Comte Mirabeau, a prominent member of the National Assembly, who hoped to restore the authority of the crown. She never fully trusted Mirabeau, however, and the king refused to contemplate a civil war, which would have been the inevitable result of Mirabeau's initial plans. They called for an escape to the interior of France and appeal from royalist support in the province. After Mirabeau's death in April 1791, the Queen turned to emigres and friends outside France for help. It was with the assistance of the Swedish Count Hans Axel von Fersen, French aristocrat, Louis Auguste Le Tourneur de Berthier, and Royalist General Francois Clermont de Beau that the plans were laid for the flight of the royal family to Montmedy. On the eastern frontier, they arranged for the king and queen to escape from Paris on the night of June 20, but revolutionary forces approached in the royal couple at Varennes, June 25, and escort them back to Paris.
End of the ancient regime and execution. Discredited by the royal family's failed escape, Marie Antoinette attempted to shore up the rapidly deteriorating position of the crown by opening secret negotiations with the leaders of the constitutional monarchies in the Constituent Assembly, namely Antoine Barnave and Theodore and Alexandre de Lameth. Barnave and the Lameth brothers were anxious to check the progress of republicanism and to bring the revolution to a close, and they gathered like minds under the banner of the Club of the Violence. The basis of their secret understanding with the Queen was that after the Constitution had been revised so as to bolster the executive power of the King, it should be loyally accepted and implemented by Louis XVI. In foreign policy, the aim of the Violence was to persuade the immigrants to return and to prevent Emperor Leopold II, Marie Antoinette's brother, from being committed to a counter-revolutionary crusade against France. The Queen remained wary of Barnave and the Violence, and although she acquiesced in the King's acceptance of the Constitution, in September 1791 she warned Leopold II that she was not in favor of either their domestic or foreign policy. Instead, she urged the necessity of an armed Congress of the powers to negotiate from strength for the restoration of the royal authority. This duplicity paralyzed the pacific policy of the Violence and did not dissuade the emigrants from their more aggressive design for the restoration of the ancient regime. After France declared war on Austria in April 1792, Marie Antoinette continued intrigues with the Austrians further enraged the French. Popular hatred of the Queen provided impetus for the storming of the Tuileries Palace and the overthrow of the monarchy on August 10, 1792.
Marie Antoinette spent the remainder of her life in Parisian prisons. The Princess de Lamballe, who remained loyal to the Queen throughout the Revolution, was imprisoned along with her. Lamballe refused to take an oath against the monarchy, and on September 3, 1782, she was delivered to the hands of Parisian mob. They cut off her hat and paraded it on a pike outside Marie Antoinette's window. Louis XVI was executed on orders from the National Confession in January 1793, and in August the Queen was put in solitary confinement in the consecrate. She was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal on October 14, 1793, and was guillotined 2 days later.
Okay, so we had a very few, like a really top asked question. So I'm going to read it and Matt will be answer it. First, why is Marie Antoinette so famous?
Well, Marie Antoinette was a queen of France from 1774 up to 1793 and is associated with the decline of the French monarchy. Her alleged remark, "let them eat cake," has been cited as showing her obvious listeness to the poor condition in which many of her subjects live. Well, she lived decently, but she probably never said it.
She is really the tone deaf, guys. Okay, next question is, how did Marie Antoinette come to power?
Marie Antoinette was the youngest daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I and Maria Theresa. She was only 14 when her parents had her married to the Dauphin Louis, grandson of Louis XV of France, for diplomatic purpose in 1774. When her husband ascended the throne as Louis XVI, she became a queen.
Last most asked question is, what was Marie Antoinette's reign like?
Well, as queen, Marie Antoinette was always unpopular. She spent lavishly, but her extravagance was only a minor cause of French growing debt in the 77s and 80s. Because of Louis XVI indecisiveness, Marie Antoinette played an increasingly prominent political role. Her rejection of reform and resistance to the French Revolution contributed to the monarchy's overthrow in 1792. I think that's it for the question.
Okay, thank you for that question, guys. Okay, so next is we're going to talk about Henry VIII. He is the King of England, and he had like 8 wives, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to talk about her his biography first. Okay, Henry VIII was born on June 28 on 1491 on Greenwich, near London, England, and he died on January 28 at 1547, London. Was the King of England from 1509 to 47, who presided over the beginnings over the beginnings of the English Renaissance and the English Reformation. His 6 wives were successfully Catherine of Aragon, the mother of the future Queen Mary I, Anne Boleyn, the mother of the future Queen Elizabeth I,
Jane
yeah, and Jane Seymour, the mother of Henry's successor Edward IV, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Accession to the throne. Henry was the second son of Henry VIII, first of the Tudor line, and Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV, first king of the short-lived line on York. When his elder brother Arthur died in 1502, Henry became the heir to the throne. Of all the Tudor monarchs, he alone spent his childhood in calm expectation of the crown, which helped give an assurance of majesty and rightness to his willful. A brilliant character, he excelled in book learning as well as in the physical exercise of an aristocratic society, and when in 1509 he ascended the throne, great things were expected of him. 6 feet tall, powerfully built, and a tireless athlete, bondsman and dancer, he promised England the joys of spring after the long winter of Henry VIII's reign.
Henry and his minister exploited the dislike inspired by his father's energetic pursuit of royal rights by sacrificing without a thought some of the unpopular institution and some of the men that had served his predecessor, yet the unpopular means for governing the realm soon reappeared because they were necessary. Soon after his accession, Henry married Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, and the attendant lavish entertainments ate into the modest royal reserve. More serious was Henry's determination to engage in military adventure. Europe was being kept on the boil by rivalries between the French and the Spanish kingdoms, mostly over Italian's claim and against the advice of his older consular. Henry in 1512 joined his father-in-law Ferdinand II of Aragon against French, and ostensibly in support of her threatened pope, to whom the devout king for a long time paid almost selfish respect. Henry himself displayed no military talent, but a real victory was won by the Earl of Surrey at Flodden 1513 against the Scottish invasion. Despite the obvious pointlessness of the fighting, the appearance of success was popular. Moreover, in Thomas Wolsey, who organized his first campaign in France, Henry discovered his first outstanding minister by the 1515. Wolsey was Archbishop of York, Lord Chancellor of England, and Cardinal of the Church. More important, he was the king's good friend, to whom was gladly left the active conduct of affairs. Henry never altogether abandoned and the positive text of kingship, and often interfered in business. He thought the world might think that England was ruled by the cardinal. The king himself knew that he possessed perfect control anytime he cared to assert it, and Wolsey only rarely mistook the world's opinion for the right one.
Nevertheless, the years from 1515 to 1527 were marked by Wolsey's ascendancy, and his initiative set the scene. The cardinal had some occasional ambition for the papal tiara, and this Henry supported. Wolsey at Rome would have been a powerful card in English hands. In fact, there was never any chance of this happening, any more than there was of Henry's election to the imperial crown, briefly mooted in 1519 when the Emperor Maximilian I died, to the succeeded by his grandson Charles V. That even altered the European situation. In Charles, the crowns of Spain, Burgundy, with the Netherlands and Austria were united in an overwhelming complex of power that reduced all the dynasties of Europe, with the exception of France, to an inferior position. From 1521, Henry became an outpost of Charles V's in imperial power, which at Pavia, 1525, for the moment destroyed the rival power of France. Wolsey attempted to reverse alliances at the unpropitious moment, brought reprisal against the vital English cloth trade with the Netherlands, and lost the advantage that alliance with the victor of Pavia might have had. It provoked a serious reaction in England, and Henry concluded that Wolsey's usefulness might be coming to an end. Loss of popularity of Henry VIII. While the greatness of England in Europe was being shown up as a sham, the regime was also losing popularity at home. The fanciful expectation of the early days could not, of course, endure. Some measure of reality was bound to ensue. As it was, journalists and writers continued to be full of hope for a king who, from 1517, committed to the services of a new consular, Sir Thomas More, one of the outstanding minds of the day. But More soon discovered that Henry found it easy to keep his enjoyment of learned conversation apart from the conduct of policy. Nothing for the moment could then Wolsey's strength, and this had serious drawbacks for the king, who supported him. The country was showing increasing signs of its discontent, and Wolsey's efforts to remedy grievance only exasperated men of influence without bringing satisfaction to the poor. Phyllis came to the boil in the years 1523 to 24. Although he disliked parliaments, Wolsey had to agree to the calling of one in 1523, but the taxes voted were well below what was required. Next year, the attempt to levy a special tax led to such a fierce resistance that Henry resented it. He and the cardinal both trying to take the credit for the remission of what they had jointly responsible for imposing, while he had Wolsey to take the blame. Henry could afford such fiat socius. The cardinal could not. By 1527, a government policy that, though seemingly Wolsey's, was really the king's, was facing bankruptcy. Ineffective abroad, unpopular at home, it made the regime look as empty of positive purpose as in fact it was.
At this point, the king entered affairs unmistakably and spectacularly among his failures so far had been his or Catherine's inability to provide a male heir to the throne. Several stillbirths and early deaths had left only a girl, the Princess Mary, born in 1560, to carry on the line, and no one realized the thought of female succession, with all the dynastic and political uncertainties it will bring. Being the man he was, Henry could not suppose the fault to be his. His rapidly growing aversion to Catherine was augmented by his infatuation with one of the ladies of the court, Anne Boleyn, the sister one his earlier mistress. Henry was no profligate. Indeed, he had a strong streak of prudery, but he sought the occasion of relief from marriage to a worthy but a lying wife, to which prince have generally been held entitled. In Ain he met his match. This 20 years old girl, brought up in a thought of school of courtly intrigue, would be more than a king's mistress. It took Henry, who in case needed to marry her if the expected issue was to solve the succession problem, some 6 years to achieve their joint purpose. Infinitely, he provoked a revolution.
From 1527, Henry pursued that what became known as the king's great matter, his divorce from Catherine. He convinced himself that his first marriage had been against the divine law, that is, against the biblical injunction left forbidding marriage with a brother's widow. The death of the children proved God's judgment on the union. With his characteristic readiness to convert his own desires into the law of God, Henry rapidly asserted himself that he was living in mortal sin with Catherine and had to find relief if he was again to become acceptable to God. He appealed to Rome for a declaration of annulment. Popes had usually obliged kings in such matters, but Henry bad-picked both his time and his case badly. He was asking Pope Clement VII to help him discard the emperor's aunt, but Clement, the emperor's prisoner in 1527 to 28, never thereafter dared resist Carlos, whose powerful feelings of familial honor and public prestige buried any concession to Henry's wishes. Moreover, the Pope's reluctance was increased by the fact that he was being asked to declare illegal an earlier exercise of papal power, which had licensed Henry's marriage to his brother's widow, of a kind that brought a good deal of money to the papal coffers. Thus, Henry's attempts to solve his dilemma in the accepted legal way were doomed from the start. Was he in a worse dilemma, since only success in the impossible could keep him in power, obtain a trial of the case in England? But this was first stated by his fellow judge, Cardinal Campeoge. On orders from Rome 1529, within weeks, Wolsey was ousted, but his disappearance solved nothing, and the councillors who succeeded him could offer little help for the king, who knew only what he wanted, not how to get it. The chancellorship went to Thomas More, who had told Henry that he did not approve of the divorce and who wished to devote himself to a fight against Lutheran heresy. Confusion was the key of policy for some 3 years, while the king teetered between hope that Rome might yet be forced to let the formal trial of his first marriage take place in England and stirrings of a more radical nature to reject Rome outright. But though he occasionally talked of doing just that, neither he nor anyone else knew how to convert talk into action.
The breach with Rome of Henry VIII. Action called for a revolution, and the revolution required a man who could convince and execute it. That man was Thomas Cromwell, who in April 1532 won control of the council and thereafter remained in command. For some 8 years, the revolution consisted of the decision that the English church should separate from Rome, becoming effectively a spiritual department of state under the rule of the king, a God's deputy on earth. The revolution that he had not intended gave the king his wish in January 1533. He married Anne Boleyn in May. A new archbishop, Thomas Cranmer, presided over the formality of a trial that declared the first marriage annual. In September, the Princess Elizabeth was born. The Pope retailed with a sentence of excommunication. It troubled no one. The supreme headship on earth over the Church of England, though he had not thought it, represented Henry's major achievement. It had a very wide-ranging consequence, but those that immediately concerned the king were two. In the first place, the new title consolidated his own concept of kingship, his conviction that, as he once said, he had no superior on earth. It rounded off the majestic image of the divinely instituted royal rule, that it was Henry's constant ambition to present to an oath and obedient world. But in the second place, it created a real personal problem for the king. Earlier in his book Assertos Pactum Sacramentoris versus Martium Lutherum in 1521, he had attacked Luther and had expressed a profound devotion to the papacy and had been rewarded with the title of Defender of the Faith. Now he had turned against the Pope. His act was equal to encouraging the Protestant Reformation, a thing attractive to Cranmer and Cromwell and perhaps Anne Boleyn, but not to Henry, who, despite Luther, the religion of newly independent church, was for its had to settle for the rest of his life. Henry, who prided himself on the theological learnings, was to give much time and thought to the nature of the true religion. With the exception of the papal primacy, he never gave up the main tenets of the faith in which he had grown up. But he had changed his mind on details and arrived at an amalgam of his own in which substitution and clerical celibacy mingle with radical views about the worldly authority of the church and the man's ability to seek salvation without the aid of priests. Yay!
Next is domestic reforms. Cromwell's decade, the 1530s, was the only period of the reign during which a coherent body of the policies was purposefully carried through. Cromwell's work greatly enlarged Henry's power, especially by transferring to the crown the wealth of the monasteries dissolved in 1536 to 40s. and the clerical taxes, but it also more expectedly than ever, subjecting the king to the law and to the legislative supremacy of parliament. Since Harry knew how to work with parliaments, the immediate effect was to make him appear more dominant than ever and to give to his reign to a spurious air of autocracy. Spurious because, in fact, the rule of law remained to control the sovereign mere will. The appearance of autocracy was misleadingly emphasized by the fact that all revolutions have their victims. As head rolled, the king's earlier reputation as a champion of flight and learning was permanently buried under his enduring fame as a man of blood. Old friends such as More refusing to accept the new order fell before the onslaught, as did some 50 other men caught by the treason laws. Between 1538 and the 1541, the families of Pole and Courtenay were destroyed by the acts for treasons linked with efforts abroad the rivers, the course of events in England, but mainly because they could claim royal blood and represented a dynastic dynastic danger to the unprolific Tudor line. The king now embarked on the series of matrimonial adventures that made him appear both a monster and a laughing stock. He soon tired of Anne, who failed to produce a male heir in 1536. She was executed with other members of the court for alleged treasonable adultery. Catherine of Aragon, rejected but on board, had died a little earlier. Henry immediately married Jane Seymour, who bore him his son Edward, but died from complication of childbirth at 1537. The next 3 years were filled with attempts to replace her. And the bride chosen was Anne, sister of the Duke of Cliffs, a pawn in Cromwell's policy for a northern European alliance against danger from France and the Emperor. But Henry hated the first sight of her and at once demanded his freedom and end achieved by a quick divorce. That's crazy.
Yes. And then physical and mental decline. The Cleves fiasco destroyed Cromwell. It enabled his many enemies to turn the king against him. In July 1540, his head fell on the scaffold. Henry had by now become truly dangerous, always secretive and suspicious. Now he was beginning to show paranoia tendency, convinced that to control everyone, he was in fact readily manipulated by those who knew how to feed his suspiciousness and pander to his self-righteousness. Full of experience, the oldest king in Europe, and increasingly competent in the routine of the rule, he had lacked the comprehensive vision and large spirit that would have made him a great man. His temperamental defensive were aggravated by what he regretted as his undeserved misfortunes, and by ill health. He grew enormously fat. Oh no!
No, he was fat.
And obese. His mind did not weaken, but he grew restless, peeved, and totally unpredictable, often melancholy, and depressed, just like us.
Yeah.
He was usually he was usually out of sort and always out passion. In 54 and until 5040 up to 5042. He briefly renewed his youth in marriage to the 20 years old Catherine Howard, who's fully in continuing her promiscuity even as queen, brought her to the block. The blow finished Henry. Thereafter, he was really a sad and bitter old man. No, though he married once more to find a measure of peace, the calm and obedient Catherine Parr. His physical ruin was complete, but he was still the king from Cromwell's fall, which he regretted too late. the only maker of policy, policy in the hand of a sick, unhappy, violent man, was not likely to be either sensible or prosperous, and so it proved. Left to himself, Henry concentrated on keeping the realm united, despite the growing strife between the religious faction, and on keeping before the world his own image as the glorious monarch of the age. The verse resulted the first wait, the first resulted in Faquin's explains against the integrated of his subject, against his counselors. The second brought him back to his first love, war and conquest, the sport of king.
In 1542, the Emperor and the King of France resumed hostilities. After a president of independence, Henry again joined the former. The Scots promptly joined the French. The Scots were routed at Solway Moss at 1542, and their king died soon after. This opened the possibility of subjugating that country permanently by means of a marriage alliance between the infant heirs to the two thrones, but the Scottish dream quickly collapsed as Henry's crude handling of the nation gave control to a pro-French party, determined to resist even an alliance with England. Physical conquest was beyond the king's means. Henry personally managed both the war and the subsequent negotiations, and he displayed amazing energy for so sick a man. But energy is not the same thing as the competence. The war proved ruinous. Money had to be raised by selling off the monastic lands, which had brought a good income. The desperate expedient of debasing the coinage, though it brought temporary succor, led to a violent inflation that made things worse. Yet even after the emperor made peace with France 1544, Henry would not let go until 2 years later.
As the years of 1546 drew to a close, it was apparent to all observers that the king had no long to live. No, not that it was clear to the man most concerned. He continued as before, lamentingly religious dissension, attending to the business of government, continuing the pretense of deathless majesty, destroying the powerful Howard family, whom he suspected of the plotting to control his successor. Consciousness almost to the very end, he died on January 28, 1547. He left the realm feeling bereft, and the government the more bewildered, because to the last he had refused to make a full arrangement for the rule of a boy king. Yes. Legacy of Henry VIII. As King of England from 59 to 5047, Henry VIII was presided over the beginning of English Reformation, which which was unleashed by his own matrimonial enforcement, even though he never abandoned the fundamentals of the Roman Catholic faith, though exceptionally well served by a succession of brilliant ministers. Henry turned upon them all. Those he had elevated, he invariably cast down again. He was attached to the humanist learning and was something of intellectual himself, but he was responsible for the deaths of outstanding English humanists of the day. Though 6 times married, he left a minor heir and dangerously complicated the succession problem of his 6th wife to join a large tally of eminent
Sorry, guys. Eminem.
eminent person executed for alleged treason, yet otherwise his regime observed the law of the land with painful particularity, formidable in appearance, in memory, and in mind, and fearsome of temper. He yet attracted genuine devotion and knew how to charm people, monstrous, egotistical, and surrounded by adulation. He nevertheless kept a reasonable grasp on the possible forever taking false step in politics. He emerged essentially unbeaten and superficially successful in nearly everything he attempted to do. Henry VIII has always seemed the very embodiment of true monarchy. Even his evil deeds, never forgotten, have been somehow amalgamated into a memory of greatness. He gave his nation what it wanted, a visible symbol of its nationalhood. He he also had done something toward giving its bitter government a useful nappy. A useful nappy as a religious reform at a social improvement. But he was not a great man.
But he was not a great man in any sense, although a leader in every fibre of his being, he little understood where he was leading his nation. But if he was neither statesman nor prophet, he also was neither the blood-stained monster of one tradition nor the royalty, born vivant of another, though cold, self-centered, ungiving forever, suspicious of the ways of the world. He could not descend to the second stereotype, despite an rudderlessness fed by self-righteousness. He never took the pleasure in killing required of the first. Simply, he never understood why the lives of so well-meaning a man should have been best so many unmerited.
Okay, now we have some question that people ask. Okay, what was Henry VIII's childhood like?
Henry was the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV. When his elder brother Arthur died in 52, Henry became the heir to the throne. He was an excellent student and athlete who enjoyed hunting and dancing. When he became king at age 18, great things were expected of him. He is talented.
Yes, and the second question is, when did Henry VIII get married?
Henry VIII got married 6 times between 1509 and 1547. That's a lot of wives, right?
Yes.
In pursuit of heirs and political alliance, his wives were Catherine of Orange, the mother of Mary I, Anne Boleyn, the mother of Elizabeth I, Jane Seymour, the mother of Henry's successor, Edward VI, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr.
Wow, that's a lot of six wives. Okay, next question. Who were Henry VIII's children?
Henry VIII was survived by the 3 children, each of whom sat on the throne of England. Edward IV ruled 1547 to 53, Mary I ruled 1553 to 58, and Elizabeth I ruled from 15 to 58 and 16 to 3. Several of his children died soon after birth. His affair with a mistress also produced a son. What? Henry Fitzroy, who died at age 17.
Oh, that's a lot of history, even though
You don't really understand.
you don't really understand. But it's still important, guys, to learn history.
And these characters are kind of like problematics.
Yeah, but still, we can learn something from them, from Mary Antoinette and Henry VIII. I guess that's it.
That's it for our storytelling for today.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been such a nice time with you guys. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Bye and see you soon on our next storytelling.